lies, corporate self-interest, and greed make up the recipe for the court case of 8 courageous men who stood up for their rights as workers back on May 4th of 1886. During what was a peaceful riot, which turned into a massacre, where a homemade bomb was thrown into a crowd of police officers, killing Officer Michael J. Deegan. And the ensuing gunfire by police would harm and kill many others. Albert Parsons, August Spies, Oscar Neebe, Louis Ling, George Engel, Adolf Fischer, Michael Schwab, and Samuel Fielden were the 8 men charged with inciting this deadly riot that led to these deaths. These were the quote-unquote leaders of the so-called anarchist movement. And clearly, they must be blamed for the massacre they inadvertently caused, right? Well, what if I told you that nearly each one of these men opposed violence in their marches? What if I told you they did everything in their power to prevent a class war instead opting for boycotting and strikes? What if I told you that the judge and jury who'd go on to convict these men would each have a bias and cause to want them dead to stop the movement they started? Today on Historical Quarrels, we wrap up today's tale by going over a sham of a trial and every single thing this court did to get all 8 of these men convicted and hanged. Welcome back. I am your Quarrel Daddy, Tyler Eckhardt, and you are listening to Historical Quarrels. I'm excited to be back, hopefully not sick. I don't feel sick, and finally left with enough time to do this story justice. I want to thank you all so much for the patience you have given me in this show for the past couple weeks while I dealt with getting sick and having to travel to go see family. Y'all really are the best group of listeners anyone could ask for, and I appreciate it so much. Couple of important announcements. We do have 2 winners for the Historical Quarrel key fobs created by Mike Ritz and his studio that you can find by looking up www.newbeliefstudio.com. I'll announce once the contest is over, which will be once all 9 key fobs have been claimed, essentially. So there are 7 left. Let me know if you'd like one by messaging me on Instagram or by emailing me at historicalquarrels@gmail.com. And you can let me know you want a key fob by simply saying, "You up?" in my DMs, and I'll know it isn't a booty call that you want, but instead some excellent merch. If it is a booty call, I don't know, find a unique, creative way to say it, and then I will politely decline. Politely. With that out of the way, let's go ahead and dive into and finish today's historical quarrel. I don't know why I said it like that. You are listening to Historical Quarrels. So to begin today's tale, let's give some background on some of the convicted men and what they were doing at Chicago at the time. So we have the evolution of radical thought in action. During the 1870s and 1880s, this was an international development, and Chicago was one of its capitals. The small but vocal group of leaders of this movement convened on several occasions in Europe and America through the early 1880s. August Spies and Albert Parsons were some power players in the Revolutionary Congress, i.e., they were pretty much the head honchos, the main dudes for this Congress, especially in Chicago, which drew 21 delegates from 14 American cities in October of 1881. Spies served as secretary, a responsibility he assumed again at the much larger and more important Congress 2 years later in Pittsburgh. He and Parsons helped produce the Pittsburgh Manifesto, the statement of principles that they hoped would galvanize their cause. They wanted to get some people excited. They wanted more people to, get all involved and really feel like this was like an important and revolutionary idea. And with that being said, the first of its 6 resolutions called for the quote-unquote destruction of the existing class rule by all means, i.e. by energetic, relentless, revolutionary, and international action. And what they meant by that isn't necessarily violence. They just wanted like people to push beyond what they thought themselves capable of. And I mean, you know, kind of going back on it now, I don't know how they didn't see that this wasn't going to cause some crazy guy to, you know, think, oh man, yeah, no, we got to fight back and we got to kill some motherfuckers. But you know, this manifesto definitely wouldn't fuck them over later. You know, they totally would not regret making it, and 100% would have come back to bite them in the ass. So now let's go over radicalism in Chicago. The transcripts of the Haymarket Trial jury selection and testimony reveal that many middle-class and native-born Chicagoans took pride in the fact that they could not define different schools of leftist thought. Yeah, they're super happy. They're like, yeah, see, I'm so American, I don't even know what the hell the different leftist thoughts are. Except to say that these groups were all opposed to American beliefs. The radicals of different stripes, socialists, communists, and anarchists, debated with each other at length about broad and fine points of doctrine. They agreed on the principle that capitalism and the wage system exploited the worker, and that the ownership of the means of production had to be taken out of private hands and returned to the people. Anarchists like Spies and Parsons rejected the idea that even a socialist or communist government should be given economic and political control of society, since any kind of hierarchical authority was inherently oppressive. In their view, the best form of government was no institutionalized government at all. They instead called for free association of responsible individuals without regulation from above. Kind of dumb in my opinion, not gonna lie. Spies and Parsons disputed the assertion that anarchism, as well as socialism and communism, were foreign imports, even if most radical agitators were born abroad. They contended that anarchism was the most natural, democratic, and American political arrangement, invoking the Founding Fathers, and Thomas Jefferson in particular, as their guiding spirits. Which I kind of get. You know, because the idea there is it's like the Wild West, or before there was like a federal government, how just people in communities like the Mayflower community just kind of came together and were like, okay, this is how we're going to run things here for this area. You know, these are the rules since we're all living next to each other. And that's kind of like the idea. You just kind of set up your own system. But that will quickly fall apart, and the entire world would have to follow that, because you would be taken over by another government or country with a much stronger government set up. Because number one, you're not going to have like funding for probably military, like hardly at all. Instead, be more focused on policing. It's going to cause a bunch of issues. So, again, it just sounds like the Wild West. And my God, the Wild West was not a good place. America has done its damnedest to make the Wild West seem all glammed up in Hollywood movies, but it was awful. With so many murders and other crimes going unpunished. Anarchism, like any novel idea of government, only works on the condition that no assholes exist. And sadly for the world, that will never, ever be the case. There will always be an asshole near you who will take advantage of a situation for their own self-interest. Personally, I'm more keen on the idea of a quote-unquote diet socialism, like Diet Coke version of socialism. Really, just the OG version of capitalism before it got corrupted. I think that style of government can work. And I think has been modeled effectively by many European countries, primarily the Nordic countries, where it's been referred to as cuddly capitalism, where they are still capitalists but have implemented many social programs and have a relatively low tax rate Like, take Norway, for example. The average person there pays about 22.7% in taxes, and 7.9% of their income goes to Social Security. So let's just call it a flat 30% per person. I, an American, pretty much already pay that throughout the year between my federal tax and my state tax, my Social Security tax, my Medicare, and everything else. I already pay that amount. And so I don't really care. I don't really care. It's like 30%, which I know some people view as ridiculous. But in Norway, they trust their government to actually fucking pay for the things that they need. So, it'd be nice to trust my government that much. And while, yes, I do get some of my taxes back come tax return season, which I know means I need to fix my W-2 and the deductions come out, I just don't have the time for that. But I wouldn't care about getting a tax return if I didn't have to worry about dropping 10 grand anytime I needed an ambulance or had to go to the ER. If the cost for having a child was free, I wouldn't ever think about a tax return. Not only that, but if some of that cost included making sure there was affordable housing, my God, would I really not care about a tax return? But Tyler, the wait times in those countries for medical care are abysmal. Man, shut the fuck up. They're abysmal here too. In order to get any organ needed for a transplant or any other type of surgery, you could be waiting months for that shit here in the US. But normal ass everyday checkups are fine to wait for. Most people only need a goddamn physical once or twice a year. I have ADHD, so I meet with my doctor once every 3 months, but can have exceptions made when needed for my work. I know in Norway, Adderall is harder to come by, but they do have a ton of other generic versions of it that are blue labeled, meaning you pay a heavily reduced cost for your medication there without needing to do anything. I mean, dear God, a government should be working for the people so the people can want to work for it. JFK's line about asking not what you can do, ask not what your country can do for you is just complete bullshit. Your country shouldn't treat you like a goddamn cog in a machine and expect you to be okay with slops. America has lost its dream, and it's time for a big goddamn change. I love this country. I really do. And what I was able to do for my grandparents and everyone before them. But it really feels like it doesn't give a shit about me or my kids. So why should I give a shit about it other than, I live here. So I should do something to make it better, right? But they broke the game so much it feels impossible to fix. And if you try, you usually end up dead because it's just corporations that run the country now, as they can lobby the fuck out of any law that will help people because their profits will suffer a little. And that's the worst part. It's usually these laws will only cause, profit loss by slim ass margins. I'm talking like 3 to 5% losses, which can happen anyways to a company. But if a law does it, then God help us, America is fucked somehow. Sorry. Long rant over. This shit gets me fired up to another level. And I know I don't sound fired up, but it's early in the morning and I'm pretty peaked right now. Anyways, Spies and Parsons charged that the current regime, marked by suffering and exploitation and held in place by might rather than right, was far more anarchic and in the negative sense of the word than they were. The chaos of contemporary events they maintained proved that capitalism caused disorder. Their alternative social vision promised peace and harmony based on equality, freedom, and justice. Which, again, no, it didn't. It's they're calling for the dissolution of a government. Every country needs to have a strong central government in order to fight against other countries with strong central governments. You still have to have room in your budget for military spending. You have to make sure that you're able to take care of a bunch of different things on a national level rather than just localized groups. Otherwise, a stronger, more military dominant country will come in and will take over. That's why it was so goddamn easy for America to go take over a bunch of islands. Why imperialism was a thing. Because those localized communities, while yes, they may have put up a bit of a fight, did not stand a chance against the strength of a strong central government in the imperialistic countries like France, England, and the US. There was no goddamn way they were getting anything or getting anywhere. Again, anarchists, I love you guys, but it's just too idealized. It's too... You're thinking like, hey, you know, if we do this and we run things like this way and everyone else followed us, that no one would come in and just be like, hey, listen, if we all teamed up, we could just go fuck them over, you know? Like, someone's going to do that. And other countries who aren't going to go with an anarchist system would immediately see the benefits and like the amount of money they could make by exploiting an anarchist America. Are you kidding me? Like, but England did to the native tribes, man. They were all small pack communities that regulated themselves. Anarchism, while it may be the more natural and like free form of government, doesn't mean it's good. It's not a good idea. I do agree that like workers shouldn't be exploiting each other, but your idealized government, all right, sorry, jobs shouldn't be exploiting their workers. That is, I agree. We can agree on that. However, your idea of a government does not work. It will never ever work again because we've already set that precedent. Matter of fact, that precedent was set by like every fucking conqueror, like Alexander the Great, and then like before him, everyone that came in and like conquered areas. They were able to do that because most places had an anarchistic system essentially set up. Anyways. The anarchists were no more unified than any other group. However, while the Pittsburgh Congress was notable for bringing people of disparate outlooks together, the quest for unity was inherently complicated by the philosophical objection of anarchists to centralized directives. Among the thorniest points of internal disagreement was the extent to which they should work with labor unions and for such causes as the 8-hour day. To do so, some contended, would be to accept the wage system and concede the value of permitting organizations such as unions to speak for individuals, which goes against the anarchistic system, clearly. I mean, it does in a way. They have a point. Spies and Parsons advocated cooperating with organized labor, not only for practical reasons, but also on the principle that unions could help overthrow the current order and provide a basis for a post-revolutionary society. This combination of anarchism and unionism became known as the, quote, Chicago idea. Chicago's anarchist leaders traveled around the Midwest and beyond for meetings, fact-finding trips, and speaking engagements. But they devoted a majority of their efforts to local activities. They harangued both the many and the few at dozens of indoor and outdoor rallies, attended countless political and social gatherings, and managed numerous organs of the radical press. Spies became editor of the Arbeiterzeitung, the leading German-language socialist paper in Chicago. In 1884, the same year, Parsons assumed leadership of the Arbeiterzeitung, Zeitung's English-language counterpart, the Alarm. Both papers were written and set in type on the upper floors of the Arbeiterzeitung building at 175th Avenue, which is now Wells Street, just north of Madison, in the heart of the city. Close to the offices of the mainstream dailies. Both men were active in numerous anarchist associations. Parsons was a mainstay of the English-speaking American group, whose membership included Samuel Fielden, a self-employed teamster who would also be convicted at the Haymarket Trial. Spies belonged to the American group, but was also a central figure in several German-speaking anarchist organizations. Depending on the occasion, he addressed the faithful and the curious in either English or German. Among his associates in the German anarchist community were future Haymarket Confederates, co-defendants Michael Schwab, assistant editor of the Arbeiterzeitung, and Oscar Nieb, who owned a small yeast company. That's right, this is a small business owner who gets fucking caught up in this because he's associated and one of the leaders of this goddamn movement that the judge and, jury viewed as being devilish or essentially going against all American ideals. Neve helped organize and manage various meetings, parades, and demonstrations. Anarchism and other schools of socialism had important cultural dimensions in the lives of working class and immigrant Chicagoans that transcended the sensational sequence of events surrounding the Haymarket. Anarchist activities included debates, discussions, picnics, plays, concerts, and parades. Members of radical groups stayed in close touch with political and social developments in Europe, and they held commemorations of such momentous events as the Paris Commune and the democratic uprisings across Europe in 1848. And by the way, I got most of this from chicagohistoryresources.org. Most of this information is coming from there. So to them and the author, the historian from this essentially 50-page book, I want to thank you for today's episode, essentially helping me compile everything. So anyways, as the 1880s unfolded, divisions in the Chicago anarchist community increased. Most Chicago anarchists identified themselves as members of the International Working People's Association, or the IWPA, the first rap group ever. That's right. You heard of the NWA, but you've not ever heard of the IWPA, and this is their first hit single.
Straight out of Chicago, crazy motherfucker named Al Parsons from the gang called I Betcha Zatung. With the labor cars on track, throwing down our verses like we're tossing out the sack. Rights for every worker, no, we're never gonna slack. Marching through the streets with our message intact. These other motherfuckers think they're tough, but when I squeeze the trigger and the bodies are hauled off, you too, boy, if you fuck with me, the police are gonna have to come and get me off your ass. That's how I'm going out. For the punk motherfuckers that's showing out, capitalists start to mumble, they wanna rumble, mix them and cook them in a pot like South Austin. Going off on the motherfucker like that with the gap that's pointed in your ass, so give it up smooth. Ain't no telling but now I'm down for a jack move. Here's a murder rap to keep you all dancing, with a crime record like Samuel Manson. Anarchism is the tool, don't make me act a motherfucking fool. Me, you can go toe to toe, no maybe. I'm knocking capitalists out the box daily. Yo, weekly, monthly, and yearly. Until them dumb motherfuckers see clearly that I'm down with the capital IWPA. Boy, you can't fuck with me. So when I'm in your neighborhood, you better duck, cause Al Parsons is crazy as fuck. As I leave, I believe I'm stomping. But when I come back, boy, I'm coming straight out of Chicago.
Yeah, that's right. Clearly, NWA stole from the IWPA's original music group that Al Parsons was a lead singer for. And I totally didn't just, get the beat, the instrumental, and just was like, I'm just going to take Ice Cube's verse and have Al Parsons be the guy singing. But it kind of works here because, they're super against, the police and, they also dealt with a bunch of police brutality, not for the same reasons, of course. It wasn't just for their skin color. It was for their beliefs. And so, hopefully that's not too offensive. I was just having fun there. I really like that song too. Straight Outta Compton's a classic. Anyways, this everything from there. I'm going to go back. By 1885, the more militant anarchists rejected the Chicago idea, believing that it compromised true anarchistic principles. Among this group were George Engel, who lived with his family above a small toy store Engel operated on Milwaukee Avenue, and printer Adolf Fischer, who had moved to Chicago in 1883. 9 years after Engel and had become head of the composing room of the Arbeiterzeitung, dismissing the Arbeiterzeitungs editorial policy as too moderate. They and others founded the Anarchist. It's another editorial, newspaper, essentially, which produced 4 issues before the police shut it down. At the same time, Engel and Fischer were arrested following the explosion of the Haymarket bomb. Engel and Fischer found a like-minded associate in Louis Ling. Ling, who was born in Germany in 1864, did not come to America until 1885 and would be the youngest of the Haymarket defendants. Engel, the oldest, was 51 when he was hanged in 1887. So sad. The proper role of violence as a tool for revolution consumed the attention of the Chicago anarchists and their enemies. and is obviously of relevance to the Haymarket bombing. In the view of all 8 of the anarchists, the state put on trial, government and the capitalist owners were merely force-propped authority. They maintained that although they did not believe in violence for its own sake, armed action in self-defense against this authority was necessary. To adopt such a tactic would be to speak the only language the existing order understood. Which, kind of, I mean, especially in their case, they were, the police were basically told to beat the shit out of them and to like violently shut stuff down by like the police commissioner or by like the mayor who was in the pocket of some of these businesses. And so many anarchists were obsessively enthralled with the possibilities of dynamite as an instant equalizer, since it was inexpensive, accessible, portable, and terrifyingly effective. Which is true. I mean, it was super easy to make, man. This explosive allowed a single anarchist to carry fearsome destructive power in the pocket of his coat. The threat created by the mere existence of dynamite was in itself a wonderful weapon. Dynamite is a peacemaker, quote, read an article in The Alarm in April of 1885, because it makes it unsafe to wrong our fellows. So the big stick theory doctrine, essentially, that Teddy Roosevelt would believe in. Anarchist rhetoric repeatedly and almost mystically invoked the primordial power of dynamite. Their reverence for it in speech and print was the major evidence used against the defendants at the Haymarket Trial. To be fair, there is a point there where they're constantly like, yeah, dynamite, you know, it's a peacemaker, and they'll have to be wary about it, you know, if it gets used. And so, you know, and then it did get used, but at the wrong time, since there wasn't, you know, violence being done to them at the time. They were being asked to peacefully leave. And there's some evidence that one of the owners of the mill that they were at may have planted someone there to throw the dynamite to then get the leaders arrested and get this whole movement shut down, because they were actually making some headway for the 8-hour workday. But we'll get into that a little later. So especially damning was People's Exhibit 15, which was a translation of Revolutionary War Science published in 1885 by Johann Most, and both advertised in anarchist papers and sold at some of their gatherings. Most was a well-known and widely feared figure in radical politics in Europe before arriving in 1882 in the United States, where he lived amidst controversy and persecution until his death 25 years later. Most resided in New York, but he made a few visits to Chicago and was the main author of the Pittsburgh Manifesto. The most notable and chilling quality of Revolutionary War Science was the matter-of-fact tone in which it surveyed the different weapons, including bombs of multiple varieties, available to the dedicated political terrorist, providing step-by-step instructions on how to assemble them. Caricatures, and by the way, why was this motherfucker not arrested? He straight up told people how to make the bombs. These other guys, while they may have been leaders of the movement, they definitely did try to like leave peacefully. And again, we'll get into this later. It's the sentence does not fit the crime that these motherfuckers committed. Caricatures by influential cartoonists such as Thomas Nast made Most the model in the public mind of the anarchist as a shaggy-haired, unwashed, wild-eyed bomb thrower, alien not only to America but also to all things decent, rational, and humane. Goddamn, they're going off on him here. So how much individual anarchists were actually committed to the use of dynamite in street warfare, and how much it was a part of rhetorical style with which they had hoped to inflame their supporters, frighten their enemies, and inspire themselves, is hard to tell. But there's no question, absolutely none, that the bomb talking dominated their expression, and that both the anarchists and those they opposed viewed the deployment of dynamite and other deadly devices as a very real possibility, especially in light of the assassination by bomb of Russian Tsar Alexander II in 1881, and other violent assaults on authority. The police and the public credited rumors of bombs being set by the homes of the rich and powerful. And State's Attorney Julius Grinnell brandished correspondence between spies and Most in front of the Haymarket jury as proof of the former's murderous intentions. So, that did not look good there. And so then by the mid-1880s, the country seemed to lurch irresistibly through a series of angry confrontations toward a major blow-up. as even thoughtful citizens believed that they were incapable of doing anything but wait for full-scale class warfare to break out. The anarchists repeatedly took to the streets in demonstrations intended to announce their cause and dramatize their presence in the city. They chose Thanksgiving of 1884, for example, to point out that want rather than plenty was the workers' lot. A few thousand demonstrators assembled downtown in cold rain to hear Parsons, Fielden, Spies, and Schwab address them. They then paraded past the homes of the wealthy. When they repeated this demonstration a year later, the militia was watching. Because, at that point, the rich were like, we're getting a little scared. They're going to eat us like the French did. In April of 1885, the anarchists organized a protest rally and parade to counter the festivities surrounding the opening of the new Board of Trading building at LaSalle and Jackson, the preeminent symbol of the capitalist system they opposed. They were prevented from approaching the building by officers led by Captain Friedrich Ebersold, superintendent of police at the time of the Haymarket meeting, Lieutenant William Ward, who would give the order for the meeting to disperse seconds before the bomb went off. On May 4th, exactly a year before Haymarket, anarchists and other labor leaders became irate when the Illinois militia killed at least 2 striking stoneworkers in the quarried town of Lamont, southwest of the city. And 3 months later, many Chicago citizens, not just anarchists, were outraged when the police clubbed innocent bystanders during a strike against the West Division Railway Company. The chief instigator of the violence was Captain John Bonfield. In his 1893 pardon of the Haymarket defendants, Illinois Governor John Peter Altgeld would cite Bonfield's conduct as the likely provocation for the Haymarket bomb. And Bonfield, if you guys remember for the last couple episodes, is the guy who was like, so they threw the bomb and then they started firing at us. And then we had to fire back, obviously, into a crowd of civilians because we couldn't see anything. So yeah, that guy, that motherfucker, he's kind of like the cause for a lot of this shit. Social divisions further intensified through the first half of 1886. Unemployment and union agitation increased as more workers joined a revived 8-hour movement, endorsing a call for a one-day walkout and demonstrations across the country on Saturday, May 1st, 1886. In the preceding weeks, the daily papers were full of news of labor warfare. Raising the level of public anxiety, employers and workers in numerous trades reached agreements, but plans for May 1st demonstrations remained in force. The police and Pinkertons, goddamn Pinkertons, remained on constant alert. Journalists and public officials talked ominously about the need to put the necks of agitators in halters. That's right. These motherfuckers, like the public officials and journalists, were already like, hey, we need to kill these motherfuckers. Or like we need to get them locked up. So, and private citizens purchased guns. From the point of view of labor, the May 1st labor demonstration was a great success, as hundreds of thousands of workers across trades nationally and tens of thousands in Chicago laid down their tools. So among many demonstrations in the city was a parade along Michigan Avenue, with Albert Parsons as one of its leaders. These demonstrations took place without serious incident, but such events would make the anarchist leaders marked men when violence did break out 3 days later in the Haymarket. That's right. The previous demonstrations these guys led, absolutely no problems at all. Nonviolent, great. Everything was cool. And then they get to Haymarket, and all of a sudden someone throws a fucking bomb. And all these people in Chicago were already purchasing, guns for themselves because they're getting worried about getting killed. So the Chicago Mail of May 1st told its readers that any turmoil that lay ahead should be attributed to Parsons and Spies. Mark them for today, an editorial warned. Hold them responsible for any trouble that occurs. Make an example of them if trouble does occur. So they were already marked for this shit. All that needed to happen is violence needed to break out. Some like crazy amount of violence. And another thing too, the bomb that gets thrown, that gets tossed, only kills one person, which means it was a low grade bomb. It was not going, I don't even think it was intended to kill someone. I think someone accidentally died. And they didn't intend for that, but they wanted a bomb to be thrown and something to go off to then, excuse, hey, shooting, killing as many of these motherfuckers as possible. And then arresting the leaders and getting them in trouble. So this really does feel planned the more you think about it. To the extent that the major Chicago dailies covered the May 1st strike, they did so with an anger and suspicion that blamed the agitation on outside radical organizers who misled workers and betrayed their best interests, which lay in trusting their employers. Yes, some of these employers could show greater understanding and flexibility, but the underlying system of capitalism was sound, which, to a degree, kinda. And at that point, and this is where I feel like this country's had a constant back and forth here. With employers and employee rights. It's, if you are essentially the means of production, right? For a business to be working, there should be a degree of rights that you get, and you should be paid fairly for your skilled labor, whatever skill that is, whether it is, serving people food with a smile, whether it's welding, whether it's laying down, just like manual labor, it's garbage, whatever you're doing, you should be paid fairly. And a lot of these businesses have to compete with other businesses who can reduce costs. And sometimes other businesses are able to do that because they own a site where they can excavate metal. And so their costs for getting that metal and purchasing it and then like transforming it into something is way less than this other business. So then this other business is like, well, how can I reduce my costs so that way I can offer my services for cheaper? Well, I'm going to take it from the employees. And that's typically what was happening. And so a lot of these people were getting pissed about that. In his remarks before sentencing at the Haymarket Trial, as in so many other instances, August Spies angrily protested against this view. Revolutions are the effect of certain causes and conditions. Spies explained. He contended that the ruling class could not stop a movement naturally engendered by its own greed and arrogance, no matter how many police and militia it assembled, Gatling guns it purchased, or gallows it erected. Here you will tread upon a spark, but there, and behind you, and in front of you, and everywhere, flames will blaze up, Spies told his accusers. It is a subterranean fire. You cannot put it out. The ground is on fire upon which you stand. So, and then kind of recapping from the last couple episodes, we're going to go over this event one more time. So the bomb. It was 10:30 with only a few hundred spectators remaining, as Fielden told his listeners that he would be brief. For whatever reason, Bonfield decided to act. The inspector hurriedly assembled his special force of about 175 men on Waldo Place, just south of the station, and then marched them in formation up Desplaines Street and through the dwindling crowd to the speaker's wagon. Bonfield's second-in-command, Captain William Ward, ordered, in the name of the people of the state of Illinois, that the meeting disperse immediately and peaceably. Fielden, who claimed in his trial testimony he had less than a minute remaining in his speech, stated also that he responded in a very conciliatory tone of voice. Why, Captain, this is a peaceable meeting. According to Fielden, when the ward angrily repeated his order, the anarchist replied, "All right, we will go," and got down from the wagon. Eyewitnesses disagreed about what happened after Ward repeated his order, but many recalled seeing the hissing fiend, a round object with a fiery fuse, as it coursed through the darkness just above the heads of the crowd on the east side of Desplaines Street. But with the police officers coming up from Desplaines Street, kind of weird that it's coming from over there. But yeah, it's nothing happened. Anyways, so Carter Harrison could hear the explosion from inside his home. It's one of the witnesses. Shrapnel from the bomb ripped through the body of Officer Matthew J. Deegan, fatally severing a major artery in his left leg. Witnesses maintained that the bombing was instantly succeeded, some said preceded, by gunfire from the crowd, and that the police valiantly held their position and returned fire. But the weight of the testimony and evidence suggests that, understandably terrified by the blast, the policemen initiated the gunplay, firing every which way, including into their own ranks. while several of their number besides Deegan appeared to have been injured by the bomb. It makes me wonder if some people heard gunshots before, if they knew something was up, like they were like, okay, we've been told that we're going to have to fire into the crowd. So let's go ahead and get started. So I wonder if some people just kind of jumped the gun a little bit, so to say. While several of their number besides Deegan appeared to have been injured by the bomb, most of the casualties seem to have been caused by bullets. That's right, the bomb didn't even take out anyone besides Deegan. There are some injuries that caused people to die a few years later, but most of those were done by the bullets. So, again, the bomb wasn't even that strong, and I really think it was a plant, dude. There's no other fucking way that it wasn't. Among the latter were Samuel Fielden and August Spy's brother Henry, who were both hit by gunfire but managed to get away. Others tried to escape as quickly as they could, scattering in all directions as the police used their pistols and clubs indiscriminately. Jammed so tightly together that they could not run, some huddled in fear against the buildings along Desplaines Street. In a few minutes, it was all over. The police gathered their wounded and carried them to an impromptu infirmary in the station house, where they were attended by several physicians called to deal with the emergency. In all, 7 policemen and at least 4 workers, there's no accurate account of the latter, were killed in the riot. Though some of the officers lingered for several days before they passed away, the death of an 8th policeman 2 years later was attributed to the wounds sustained at Haymarket. The experience unquestionably altered the lives of many of those who survived. Several officers suffered amputated limbs, and one lost a section of his jaw. Again, from bullet-related wounds. The bomb talking that had suffused the anarchist rhetoric had moved to bomb throwing. In her 1884 Word to Tramps, Lucy Parsons had urged the desperate not to suffer and die alone, but to visit dynamite in the midst of their oppressors. Then let your tragedy be enacted here, she told them. Thus send forth your petition and let them read it by the red blare of destruction. The petition had been sent forth, but the tragedy had only just begun. The Chicago police had scarcely gathered their dead and wounded before they embarked on a fierce roundup of every real or imagined radical in the city. A terrible crime had been committed, and the perceived perpetrator was not so much a particular person as anarchism itself. So they had to go against anarchism and arrest anarchism. The police received active encouragement from a frenzied and frightened public, as well as from State Attorney Julius Grinnell, who reportedly ordered, "Make the raids first and look up the law afterward." It's just bullshit. That goes against, the Fourth Amendment, the fucking no search and seizure without, I guess they might have had proper cause because, again, these leaders, it doesn't matter. They wanted these people dead. They were going to have them killed legally, essentially. The result was both a latter-day witch hunt and the first Red Scare in America. Although only 8 men would stand trial, dozens found themselves in the toils of law. So they would arrest up to 31 people and then just keep 8 of them. And the leaders, essentially. So perhaps the most active, certainly most self-promoting of the many policemen conducting the Haymarket investigation was Captain Michael Shack of the 5th Precinct, whose headquarters were in the East Chicago Avenue station. Shack's 1889 Anarchy and Anarchists is the most comprehensive contemporary history of Haymarket. Not far behind the scenes were the Chicago businessmen who were special targets of anarchist incentives. Among them were men like Marshall Field, George Pullman, and Cyrus McCormick Jr., who I mentioned in the last episode. They had been on special lookout for troublemakers since at least 1877, and who were well aware of their own central roles as villains in radical rhetoric. And they didn't like being called villains, especially McCormick Jr. He's like, "No, my daddy made me the boss. How dare you try to make me not feel special?" They donated money to the families of the police who marched on the Haymarket and also to Shack's investigation. They funded it. As Shack described it, they wished to see, quote, "the law vindicated and order preserved in Chicago." Sorry, every time I think of a villain speaking, I do go for a southern, a bit of a drawl. I want to see the law vindicated. I don't know why when I think of an American villain, I just go south, probably just because of slavery and growing up in the North in Washington made me just makes me think that. Even though I know many people from the South that are really cool and not assholes and not racist at all. So I do know many people from the South that are not really cool and, are assholes and racist. So yeah, it's a bit of a mixed bag there. Anyways. So that the police conducted their arrests and searches without warrants seemed of no particular concern to anyone but the accused. Because again, they had done their best to frighten and already primed the public for feeling like the leaders were responsible for everything. So by this point, all the leaders and everyone that got arrested were already viewed as the public as guilty without a trial. They didn't even need a trial. They viewed them as guilty because they had primed the public through the papers at this. Again, they've been priming and prepping the public for hating anarchism. And did it in the most popular papers possible. This is like a fucking psyop operation in the 1880s, dude. It's nuts. So what small sympathy Parsons' spies ever enjoyed among the general population had been shattered by the bomb, while the martyrdom of the policemen cried out for repression and revenge. The arrest began Wednesday morning, May 5th, with a series of raids on the Arbeiterzeitung building, which Grinnell described in his opening statement at the trial as a, quote, nest of snakes. In short order, August spies Michael Schwab and Adolf Fischer were in custody, that quickly, subject to abusive interrogation. With George Engel and Samuel Fielden and Oscar Neebe, among many others, soon to follow. Several of those picked up were questioned at the central station in the city hall, where Police Superintendent Frederick Ebersold and the plainclothes detective force were based. In the days after the bombing, the police also reported the discovery of anarchist weapons and explosives in various sites throughout the city. They were positively thrilled to find a pistol, a dagger, and a belt with the initials of the paramilitary organization Lehr and Wehren on Fischer when they searched him, and a red flag, a sword, and 2 guns when they ransacked Neebe's home. Which, again, these people have a right to arms. They're allowed to own weapons. And they're like, yeah, these guys, they own weapons. Clearly they were planning something. And then just like everyone else that isn't a communist, just kind of thinking about like the guns that they have at home, like, oh, wait, hold up. Just bullshit. The most dramatic arrest was that of Leusling by Detective Hermann Schuletter, who testified at the trial that he prevented the fugitive from cocking a revolver and shooting him by biting the anarchist's thumb as they wrestled on the kitchen floor of Ling's hideout. Which is such bullshit. I mean, okay. He wrestled him to the ground, probably broke into his home without a warrant, and Leusling was like, hey, what the fuck are you doing here? Hey, get off me. And then went for a gun and tried to act in self-defense like any rational person would. Oh my God. And then he's like, oh, I'm a hero because I bit his thumb and he stopped him from killing me. So dumb. So fucking dumb. The police detained and released Rudolf Schnabelt, Schwab's brother-in-law and fellow anarchist, only to focus on him afterwards as the likely bomb thrower. By the time they came back for Schnabelt, he had left Chicago and the country, never to be seen again. Yeah, that motherfucker knew. He was going to get hanged. The other key suspect who eluded the police was Albert Parsons, who, at the urging of his wife and friends, had caught a train out of the city the evening of the bombing. Parsons stayed briefly in the Geneva, Illinois home of fellow American group members, William and Lizzie Holmes, and then found safe refuge in the small town of Waukesha, Wisconsin, about 20 miles west of Milwaukee. A grand jury was impaneled on May 17th, and 10 days later, it presented a 69-count indictment on spies Parsons, Fielden, Schwab, Fischer, Engel, Ling, Neebe, and Schnabelt for the murder of Officer Matthias J. Deegan. There was no official explanation of why they were charged only with this one homicide, given that several policemen had died, but it may have been because Deegan's death was clearly attributable to the bomb and not the gunfire that followed, and they knew if they tried to attribute it to the gunfire and people did some digging, found out what bullets killed other police officers, they would have realized it came from the guns of other police officers. So the one death was enough. The 38th count specifically named Schnabelt as the individual who unlawfully, willfully, feloniously, and of his malice aforethought, made an assault upon the body of Matthias J. Deegan with a certain deadly and destructive instrument, charged with divers dangerous and explosive substances. The indictment also included William Seliger, in whose home on Cedric Street, a few blocks south of North Avenue, Ling boarded. In this building, Ling, Seliger, and others had manufactured bombs, even on the day of the tragedy, very much like the one thrown in the Haymarket. Seliger avoided the prosecution when both he and his wife agreed to testify for the state, as did Gottfried Waller, who had chaired the Monday night meeting of militant anarchists in Grief's Hall. The same 10 men and 21 others were also indicted for conspiracy, riot, and unlawful assembly, but these charges never came to trial, because they just needed the one to kill. While the grand jury was in session, Chicago socialist and physician Ernst Schmidt assumed the leadership of a defense committee. With great difficulty, he and his associates assembled a very capable 4-man legal team headed by William P. Black. Black was an accomplished attorney and highly decorated Civil War veteran who was still commonly referred to by his wartime rank of captain. So Captain Black. The trial opened on June 21st in the grand upstairs courtroom of the Cook County Criminal Court, built shortly after the fire just north of the river on Michigan, now Hubbard Street, between Dearborn and Clark. Adjoining the rear of the courthouse was the county jail, where the prisoners were held. The first day's proceedings were soon interrupted by a spectacular surprise: the surrender of Albert Parsons to stand trial with the others. Yeah, this guy came back and was like, you know what? I'm gonna stand trial with them, because he wanted to make sure he wanted to be with his fellow activists, his fellow anarchists, because he really believed in his movement that much. So, good on him for having balls to do that, but it's also kind of dumb because it's what led to his death.
But before his death, Al Parsons decided to drop another sick ass beat, and we have a recording of that right here for all of us to listen to. So here we go.
Fuck the police coming straight from the underground. A young anarchist got it bad cause my belief, and not the other doctrine, so police think they have the authority to kill anarchy. Fuck that shit, cause I ain't the one for a punk motherfucker with a badge and a gun to be beaten on and thrown in jail. We can go toe to toe in the middle of a cell. Fuck with me, cause I'm a leader with nothing but a pen and a rager. Searching my house looking for the nitroglycerin, thinking every anarchist is making explosives. You'd rather see me in the pen than me and Augustus, cause out causing a ruckus. See the police out of shape, and when I'm finished, bring the yellow tape to tape off the scene of the slaughter. Still getting swole off of bread and water. I don't know if or what, search the anarchist down and grabbing his nuts. And on the other hand, without a gun, they can't get none. But don't let it be a black and a white one, cause they'll slam you down on the street top. Blue collar police showing out for the trust fund cop. Our Parsons will swarm on any motherfucker in a blue uniform. Just cause I'm from the IWPA, punk police are afraid of me. A young anarchist on the warpath, and when I'm finished, it's gonna be a bloodbath. A cop's dying. Yo, spies, I got something to say.
Al Parsons was the realest motherfucker that there is. So the visceral feelings of fear and anger surrounding the trial ruled out anything but the pretense of justice right from the outset. The quest for jurors who had not already made up their minds would have been extremely challenging in any event because of the publicity and passion surrounding the case. Selecting an unbiased jury became an impossibility. However, since the special bailiff charged with filing the veneers or panels of potential jurymen purposely stacked them with individuals who he thought would be biased against the defendants, during the voir dire, the interrogation of these veneers, the state used its preemptory challenges, i.e. the right to dismiss a possible juror without having to state a cause that was then subject to the judge's ruling, to eliminate the few workers who were summoned. So they straight up just were like, hey, these workers who were protesting with them, not allowed to be jurors. So they just immediately, they're like, nah, fuck it. We're going to stack it with people that we know are going to execute them. The result was a middle-class and native-born panel comprised largely of salesmen, small businessmen, and clerks, people who benefit the most, not off of anarchism, but of the capitalist system. Many of the nearly 1,000 individuals who were called candidly admitted that they were unable to presume, as the law prescribed, that the defendants were innocent until proven guilty. So, should have immediately gotten rid of them. Judge Joseph Gary frequently prompted admittedly biased potential jurors to assert that they could still decide the case solely on the evidence. The questioning consumed over 21 working days of the 54-day trial, and the last juror was seated only after the defense exhausted all of its 160 peremptory challenges, many of which it was forced to use because Gary refused to dismiss obviously hostile men for the cause, which is insane. So when Grinnell finally began his opening argument on July 15th, he stated that he would name the bomb thrower. He subsequently summoned a witness named Malvern Thompson, a hosiery salesman for Marshall Field, who claimed he heard Spies and Schwab discuss the bombing before the meeting, and another man, a painter named Harry Gilmer, who swore that he saw Spies come down from the wagon and light a bomb that Schnaubelt then threw into the ranks of police. But the defense seriously undermined this testimony. The accused lawyers provided evidence that Schwab did not attend the Haymarket rally at all, that Schnaubelt had left before the rally was over, that Spies never got off the wagon, and that these men conversed with each other only in German, which the witnesses admitted that they did not understand. So immediately, their eyewitnesses should have just been thrown out. The defense also found several acquaintances of Gilmer's who testified that they would not trust his word even under oath. Although Grinnell continued to maintain that Thompson and Gilmer spoke the truth, he thenceforth devoted his central efforts to establishing that the accused had caused the bomb to be thrown, even if they may not have actually thrown it themselves. Because he understood at that point, like, oh, guess I'm not going to just get them on throwing the bomb. So, but they caused it. It was their fault it was thrown. In so doing, Grinnell offered an intricate scenario that traced the line of intention linking the events at McCormick's, the Monday night meeting at Grief's home, the notices in Arbeiterzeitung, Ling's bomb making, the gathering of the American group around the same time the Haymarket rally began, and several other actions. Grinnell claimed that the accused were desperate to force a confrontation in the Haymarket that would be the start of a broader campaign of terror against the police in particular and the citizenry at large. Bonfield resisted such a confrontation with great patience and discretion until he had no choice but to act. Although his decision to disperse the rally had caused death and suffering, it was a noble and necessary sacrifice characterized by selfless bravery that scattered the enemy and, coupled with the arrest that followed, saved the city from greater carnage and catastrophe. Such bullshit. Drawing on the testimony of several officers, the state contended that the police drawn into a trap that Spies and others devised months before and had described to some of the news reporters summoned to testify, had displayed remarkable self-discipline and professionalism after the bomb exploded. They drew their revolvers and shot back only when fired upon by the crowd in the Haymarket, including Samuel Fielden. The fact that one or more parts of this case did not precisely fit, and the fact that the prosecution could not positively prove that Schnaubelt or any of the other 8 men on trial had actually committed or even planned this particular act of terrorism did not matter. Grinnell argued that the accused's words and deeds indisputably made them accessories to the crime. In the days, weeks, months, and even years preceding the bombing, they had encouraged the infamous act, which Grinnell compared to treason, another capital offense. They were as guilty of murder as was the crowd who perpetrated this horror. The defense attorneys acknowledged that the accused had pushed the limits of free speech in preaching dynamite and revolution, but they argued that this involved sedition, not homicide, and was hardly a capital offense. They built their case around, sedition is still I mean, some people would consider that treason. Anyways, they built their case around refuting the specific charge of murder and the implicit indictment for conspiracy. If the state could not identify the bomb thrower, there was no way that the accused could be found culpable as accessories in the death of Deegan. The Haymarket rally was tame, as defense witness Mayor Carter Harrison described it to Bonfield. Another defense witness, a traveling salesman named Barton Simonson, said Bonfield seemed eager for trouble when Simonson saw him earlier that evening. Black contended that Bonfield had no reason to disperse a meeting whose already small crowd had thinned and that was drawing to a close. The men standing trial were as surprised by what happened as anyone. Defense testimony showed that even the most militant of them had been heard to pronounce the bombing foolish and counterproductive after it occurred. Furthermore, they would never have behaved the way they did before, during, and after the meeting if they were guilty. The defense witnesses also maintained that the police had begun the shooting. One of the state's witnesses identified a bullet taken from a wounded officer as of the type used by the police. The defense attorneys did not defend anarchism, but they did argue that the accused were sincere in their hope for a better society. Moses Solomon described his clients in his closing argument as men of broad feelings of humanity, declaring that their only desire has been and their lives have been consecrated to the betterment of their fellow men. Lead attorney Black even compared them to Jesus Christ, the great socialist of Judea, which prompted a bitter rebuttal from Grinnell. I mean, he's not wrong. Jesus, like, the teachings of it, he wanted everyone to take care of each other and like to give up their riches and stuff. And, you know, that makes people with money pretty mad usually when they're also a Christian. Black in turn reminded the jurors that, contrary to Grinnell's statements, law and anarchy were not on trial, that the charge was murder and not treason. Although his client's speeches and articles were full of talks of explosives, at no demonstration, including the Haymarket meeting, had they urged their listeners to begin the armed revolution right then and there. Black put spies Parsons, Fielden, and Schwab on the stand to account for their own whereabouts on May 4th, to summarize what they said that evening, and perhaps to demonstrate that they were thoughtful and sensitive human beings, not the demons the prosecution made them out to be. The defense's efforts were hampered continually by Judge Gary, by the judge. So, again, if the judge is already pissed at you and hates you, then, you know, you're kind of fucked. There's this guy who ruled significant portions of the defense's questioning and testimony incompetent, while granting the state extremely wide latitude. The list of instructions Gary read to the jury after the closing arguments also clearly favored the state's reading of the case. The 12 men retired to consider their verdict on the afternoon of August 19th and reached a decision within a few hours. The next morning, they declared the 8 defendants guilty of murder, sentencing Oscar Neebe, against whom even Grinnell privately admitted that the case was weak, to 15 years at hard labor and condemning the other 7 to death. I mean, even Grinnell admitted that the case was weak against Neebe, and they still sentenced him to jail. Like, 15 years hard labor. Like, are you kidding me? Are you fucking kidding me? The trial then adjourned until early October, at which time, after rejecting another series of defense motions, Gary asked the defendants if they wished to speak to the question of why the sentence should not be pronounced against them. Between October 7th and 9th, speak they did. First spies, then Schwab, Neebe, Fisher, Ling, Engel, Fielden, and finally Parsons, who declaimed for 8 full hours over 2 days, with Gary impatiently refusing requests to let them rest. While his fellow defendants had used at least a portion of their time to talk on a personal level about their disappointed hopes for a better America, Ling would have none of this. He had seemed indifferent to the action in the courtroom during the long, hot days of July and August. But now he bitterly thanked the court that ordered his execution based on what he called the perjured testimony of squealers and hireling knaves for conceding him the liberty of a final speech. He made one more plea for anarchy and its opposition to the universal misery, the ravages of the capitalist hyena. And he assured his enemies that his death would be avenged by the masses with dynamite. He says, "I despise you," he told his captors. "I despise your order your laws, your force-propped authority. Hang me for it. God damn. Oh, goddamn. Gary, like the jury, was more than ready to oblige. He sentenced Neeb to the state penitentiary at Joliet and ordered that each of the other defendants between the hours of 10 o'clock in the forenoon and 2 o'clock in the afternoon of the 3rd day of December next, in the manner provided by the statute of the state, be hung by the neck until he is dead. Whoo, boy. Yeah. No, they straight up, the police for some of those defendants, straight up for the defense, went and kidnapped one of them, which I explained last episode, and took him to Buffalo, New York. And that guy would have straight up countered a lot of the testimonies done by the offense. The states, by the state and the arresting party. So yeah, that's cool. That's fun. That's justice right there. So although the bomb itself was the single most dramatic event in the whole tragic history of Haymarket, the legal proceedings in the Cook County Criminal Court provided the most explicit examples of Haymarket as drama. It was in these proceedings that so many social ideas that had been contending over the last 15 years were forced to confront each other through the formal practices of the law. These practices cast the different participants, willingly or not, into roles such as defendants, jurors, witnesses, and attorneys toward the larger end of the performance of justice. The drama centered in the trial itself, but it began with the interrogations, the coroner's inquest, and the grand jury hearings, and would continue through the presentation of the verdict and beyond that to the executions. What sets Haymarket apart from almost every other criminal trial in American history, I wouldn't say every other, and what explains both its notoriety and its enduring imaginative and emotional interest, is the degree to which those directly involved understood what was happening as drama. In the courtroom, the opposing attorneys tried to fit the same general sequence of events into two opposing plots that explained both the bomb and the times in very different ways. In the state's view, these evil and cowardly agitators were part of a large criminal organization of foreign malcontents and misfits who had together carefully planned the riot and murder for no motive other than their hatred of honestly earned property. Enacting, as it did, the state was not only punishing those who maimed and murdered Matthias Deegan, but was saving the civilized order they had given his life to defend. The defense, meanwhile, depicted the accused as innocent scapegoats, miscast as villains, and a rush to lay blame. The defendants themselves saw the bomb, no matter who threw it, as the natural outcome of a corrupt economic system, and the trial as at once a staged attempt to cover up the fault lines in a regime of repressive exploitation and the latest and most irrefutable evidence that such a regime existed. So, it's whoever you want to go for. And lately, nowadays, it definitely seems like the regime has been winning quite a bit. So, the regime exists, man. It's real. The audience for these conflicting scenarios was the general public, including the large majority of Chicago's working class population, for whom both sides claimed to be special advocates. The state was especially aware of the degree to which this was a show trial. Its larger purpose was to demonstrate to those it identified as the enemies of the current order, to the world, and perhaps even to themselves, that the duly elected agents of the people were in charge, and would effectively defend society against those who dared to undermine it, or really just undermine them. Grinnell freely admitted that because the 8 men on trial were essentially representatives of a profounder malignancy, by the same logic he was using in prosecuting them, he could have charged many more. His assistant state's attorney, George Ingham, told the jury in his closing argument that the great question which you are to answer by your verdict is whether the law of the state of Illinois is strong enough to protect itself. The state managed the case with such theatrical flair. The prosecution displayed before the jury such props as anarchist flags, emblazoned with threatening slogans, along with the bloodstained uniforms of the police, as an entire arsenal of bombs and bomb-making equipment. Although the defendants were formally accused of killing only Officer Deegan, with Gary's blessing, the prosecution invoked the deaths of the other policemen as if they were part of the charge. It wasn't officially on the legal papers, the other people, but they were essentially allowed to be like, hey, jury, think about these other 8 people who died too. So, that's that's important to consider. One critic of the prosecution compared Grinnell's strategy to the style and manner of the minor theaters. When the defense lawyers protested that much of the state's evidence should be excluded because it had no specific relation to the murder of Deegan, the actual crime at hand, Gary here, too, repeatedly overruled them. He also denied their motion for separate trials, which was based on their contention, born out of the actual trial, that evidence or testimony brought against one defendant would be held against all, which is super fair. I don't think that should, what like one man said should not, go against the other. But the state viewed them all as co-conspirators, and they needed to get rid of this movement. This aspect of the prosecution of the case also had dramatic intention. For to try these 8 anarchists at once had the effect of making them appear to be in league with one another, even though several did not become acquainted until they were thrown together in jail. Gary's conduct showed how much he, too, both understood the trial as a drama and participated in it as such. As contemporary illustrations reveal, he permitted female acquaintances to sit by him in the courtroom, sometimes conversing with them privately as the trial was in session. These guests included Mrs. Gary, but also a number of attractive and well-dressed young women. While he allowed the prosecution to introduce as evidence a library of anarchist writings and all sorts of banners and bombs with no relation to the charge, he squelched the defense lawyers' protests by telling them to sit down and don't make scenes. So, Captain Black, nevertheless, tried his best to do just that. With grave misgivings on the part of others on the defense team, Black approved of Parsons leaving his hiding place in Wisconsin to turn himself in on the first day of the trial. Black hoped that this bold gesture would play well before the jury, convincing them of his client's innocence and idealism. But perhaps no one involved in the trial had as fully developed a sense of the dramatic as the accused themselves, especially Parsons and spies. It is impossible to speculate whether, on some conscious or unconscious level, they were pleased to be put on trial. But in some respects, the terrible injustice being visited upon them proved that they were right in their claim that the state was repressive and that its law was a sham. Not sharing their attorney's belief in the current order, they perhaps realized from the start that, given the public mood, the trial was a mere show with the verdict scripted from the outset. Which it really was. Like they knew that they were fucked. But at least this show took place in the local and national spotlight that the defendants had long desired. They wanted to, get some more eyes on their message and on what they were doing. So they were cool with being martyrs for the most part. Now that they had the country's attention, they were determined to take advantage of it. Once in court, they did the best they could. Parsons, who had let his gray hair grow in when he was in hiding, dyed it again and groomed his mustache. He was careful about how he dressed for court, and like the others, wore a flower on his lapel. And he carefully prepared for his trial testimony and his lengthy speech before sentence, like 29 fucking pages, like goddamn lengthy ass speech before sentencing. Judge Gary later admitted how effective he found the anarchists as orators. Though mainly to point out how dangerous they were. He was like, they're dangerous. They almost convinced me that they were innocent. How dare they? Fucking anarchists. At the time of the trial, however, the otherwise unfriendly Chicago Times had nothing but admiration for Parsons' performance on the stand, describing how, quote, he went on from eloquence to oratory, and from oratory to logic, and from logic to argument. The Chicago Tribune said of Spy's remarks before sentencing that, quote, his voice is agreeable and his slight accent is rather pleasant than otherwise, reminding one in some inexplicable way of the exquisite tones and charming accent of Modjeska, the titled Polish actress, who was very popular back then. So instead of being ashamed that the Haymarket had taken place where it did, the Chicago Daily News boasted proudly that the crime and trial focused attention of the world on Chicago. The paper claimed that the city was performing nobly before this global audience. The anarchists and their sympathizers obviously thought otherwise. With their own publications shut down, their best outlets to the general public were reporters for the mainstream press. These journalists were given remarkably free access to the prisoners, even before the indictments. While he was on the run, Parsons sent a letter addressed to my fellow workers to the Daily News, which published it on May 9th. But the newspapers generally reflected and encouraged the desire to turn Haymarket into a revenge tragedy. The English socialist Edward Aveling, son-in-law of Karl Marx, who met with the condemned men after the conviction, later commented, quote, "If these men are ultimately hanged, it will be the Chicago Tribune that has done it." End quote. He was not wrong. The Chicago Tribune definitely pissed off the public. And it's in large portion their fault for essentially getting everyone angry at them and for painting this story and causing everyone to already just have a guilty verdict in mind. Daily News publisher Melville Stone had been one of the people who helped Grinnell devise the conspiracy argument he used so successfully to convict the anarchists in the absence of any direct link between the defendants and the bomb. Because there was no direct link, which is, again, crazy. Absolutely crazy. When shortly before the hangings, Stone later pleaded unsuccessfully with Parsons to get the anarchists to ask for clemency in order to avoid execution. Parsons blamed Stone for his plight. Even those in the general population who might have been expected to be most forgiving were either silent or accusatory. Among the many public commentaries on the Haymarket were numerous sermons preached in Chicago's churches. One of these was Christianity and the Red Flag, delivered by the Reverend Frederick A. Noble at Union Park Congregational Church, near Mayor Harrison's home, on the first Sabbath after the bombing. Noble took as his text a passage from Isaiah 59, quote, "Their feet run to evil, and they make haste to shed innocent blood. Their thoughts are thoughts of iniquity, desolation, and destruction are in their paths." This, said Noble, is an ancient description of an anarchist. So, yeah, it's fucking everyone's going against them. Deeply troubled by the events of the courtroom, the defense laid the groundwork for an appeal while the trial was in progress by taking exception to dozens of Judge Gary's rulings. On October 1st, Black and his associates filed a cluster of new motions, affidavits, and objections. One motion asked that the testimony be admitted from a man named Otis Favor, who contended in his sworn affidavit that he heard Henry Rice, the special bailiff in charge of jury selection, boast that he was taking care to summon such men as would assure that the accused would hang as certain as death. That's a damning witness right there. Other motions presented statements that called into question the impartiality of several of the jurors and that further attacked the character and credibility of Harry Gilmer, the witness who claimed to see spies leave the speaker's wagon and light the Haymarket bomb. The prosecution parried with its own affidavits defending the jurors and Gilmer. Captain Black also charged that portions of Grinnell's closing argument were untrue, irrelevant, and inflammatory. In addition, Black requested that the court hear the testimony of Indianapolis saloon keeper John DeLuce, who claimed that early on the morning of the bombing, a dark-suited stranger with a mustache entered his establishment carrying a small satchel. After asking about the state of the local labor movement, this man allegedly told DeLuce that he was on his way from New York to Chicago, adding ominously, "You'll hear of some trouble there very soon." He then pointed to the satchel and said, "I have got something in here that will work. You will hear of it." And one of the many mysteries of the Haymarket drama that will never be resolved is whether this story had anything of substance to it. In any case, Judge Gary overruled the request to hear DeLuce's testimony, as he had so many others, including, most importantly, the motion for a new trial. The first of 13 points contained in the defense's motion read, "The verdict in said cause is contrary to the law and the evidence." And so by the time Black knew that Gary would do nothing to disturb the verdict, and that his best hope was to appeal the case to the Illinois Supreme Court, in early November, he formally asked this higher body for a writ of error, requesting that the court review the case to determine whether legal errors had indeed been committed. Judge Gary had already granted a stay of execution until the state Supreme Court decided whether to issue the writ. And on November 25th, Thanksgiving Day, State Supreme Court Chief Justice John M. Scott granted the writ, indicating that the court would hear arguments in the upcoming March term. So they got a bit of a reprieve there. And in order to assist Black and to broaden support among the general public for the convicted men, the defense committee enlisted the services of prominent Chicago attorney Leonard Swett. The brief and argument formally submitted for the anarchists asserted that mere participation in an unlawful assembly did not make an individual coincidentally present at that assembly responsible for the independent crime of a participant. The appeal contended furthermore that a person could not be held as an accessory in an unlawful conspiracy unless the principal perpetrator of an illegal act was identified as part of this conspiracy. Since the identity of the individual who actually threw the Haymarket bomb remained a matter of speculation, there was no way to prove that he was part of any conspiracy involving the 8 men prosecuted. Grinnell, joined by Illinois' Attorney General George Hunt, reiterated the argument he had made in Gary's court. The convicted men had either been directly connected with the bomb throwing or were guilty as accessories. Their words and actions did indeed reveal an unlawful conspiracy. The sequence of events between the riot at the McCormick Works and the bombing in the Haymarket were all part of a dastardly plan carefully concocted well in advance. The jury had been fair and impartial, and there were no errors substantial enough to justify a new trial. As did Black and Swett. Grinnell and Hunt pointed out the larger questions were at stake in the case. The history of the history of crime in this state shows no parallel in all its pages to the murderous act for which the defendants in the Haymarket Trial have been convicted. They concluded, quote, an act which, as the record shows, was wholly unprovoked and without the shadow of justification, showing a heart utterly depraved and a wicked disregard for human life. End quote. Although much of the general population believed they were guilty, the anarchists had a small but vocal number of supporters. These included Ernst Schmidt and other members of the Defense Committee Fund, who appealed through socialist and anarchist publications and organizations in America and Europe for renewed financial assistance to mount the appeal. And Lucy Parsons, who definitely didn't want her husband to die, and other radicals who lectured or wrote on behalf of the condemned men. They were joined by an articulate group of people who, regardless of their precise political beliefs, were convinced that a great injustice had been done in Gary's court. A prison term was perhaps in order, but not the death penalty. At numerous rallies, speakers joined Black and Swett in questioning the legality of the trial, and several pamphlets were issued to raise points similar to those made in the appeal. And at one of these rallies, a bomb was thrown, and it injured another police officer. It didn't kill him this time, and Black and Swett were thrown in jail and beaten with giggle gavels, and then made to, they sodomized Black and Swett with the giggle gavels. Just kidding. No, nothing like that happened. Meanwhile, while they were doing, sorry, wouldn't that be ironic though? Like, that would be such like, no doubt this is a conspiracy. So like when they go do a rally again, since the law hasn't been made yet that they can't just like arrest people for being accessories to a crime, they plant another person to throw another bomb. Who knows? Anyways, meanwhile, most journalists remained hostile. America's leading writers were also unsympathetic, with the lone exception of novelist William Dean Howells, who risked his own standing as the most respected American man of letters when he objected publicly to the verdict and tried with little success to persuade others in the literary community to join him. That's how convinced and how short-sighted all these motherfuckers were back in the past, man. They were like, nah, dude, they're communists. They're commies. It's really just a red scare that happened here. Among those who agonized about what to do were leaders of the American labor movement. It was hard for them to stand silent as the state prepared to punish these self-proclaimed champions of the working man, who were themselves union members and organizers, and in a few instances, outspoken advocates of the 8-hour cause. At the time of the bombing, Samuel Gompers, soon to be head of the fledgling American Federation of Labor, was upset that the violence in the Haymarket would make the task of organizing effectively more difficult. Gompers did not speak on behalf of the accused during the trial, but he would eventually become one of the strongest voices calling for clemency. He maintained that their execution would be a national disgrace, and that it would only bring sympathy to extremists and undermine the voices of reason. Knights of Labor Chief Terence Powderly divided and weakened his union, many of whose members wished the national organization to take an official stand against the verdict by remaining adamantly against the condemned men to the last. Which is crazy to me. But a lot of that was just because of the Daily News and how they painted this picture of them, wanting to cause violence when really these guys were just saying like, hey, if things don't change, someone's going to get violent. Their voices are going to be heard through dynamite. But although incarcerated, the convicted anarchists hardly remained passive or quiet. In order to generate income and present their case before the public at large, their supporters published the speeches the defendants gave in court before sentencing. A week after the prisoners delivered these remarks, they drew up a contract for what they called the Anarchist Publishing Association, devoted to communicating their own personal appeal to the world. And between October of 1886 and April of 1887, this Chicago-based labor weekly Knights of Labor featured autobiographies prepared in jail by 7 of the defendants, followed in early October of 1887 by an introduction to the story of the anarchists by Captain Black. Louis Ling's account of his life subsequently appeared in 3 installments, starting at the end of 1888 in the Revived Alarm, the English language anarchist paper that had been closed down immediately following the bombing. Aside from a short exercise period, the prisoners were permitted a little range of physical activity. They spent much time reading and writing. Parsons also passed the hours whittling and carving a small boat that was auctioned for $150 to raise money for his family. He and the others sent and received mail, and they were permitted to accept food, books, and other gifts. Judging by the stories in contemporary newspapers and magazines, they frequently spoke with, or at least were observed by reporters. Every day but Sunday, they were allowed to meet with a number of visitors from near and far. The prisoners saw their relatives as much as possible, which provided some comfort to all involved, but emotional distress was unavoidable. Fielden's wife gave birth to a son the day before Judge Gary sentenced him. Oscar Neeb's wife, Meta, who had fainted upon hearing the news of the verdict in August of 1886, died suddenly following the march of an apparent heart ailment. The Illinois Staatszeitung, the voice of the conservative German community in Chicago, reported sympathetically that socialist Paul Grotkow told the several thousand mourners gathered at Meta Neeb's funeral that he refused to give a eulogy, but would instead raise my voice in protest against society, whose victim Mrs. Neeb is. In search of personal interest stories, the Chicago daily newspapers frequently reported the visits from members of the anarchist families. They described the, quote, affecting scenes in the prison in terms that humanize the inmates, whom on other occasions these same papers characterized as beasts and cowards. So they're finally starting to realize, oh, these fuckers are human. They're human. Maybe we shouldn't be so mean to them. A little too late now, dumb motherfuckers. Reporters usually pointed out that the heartbreak they witnessed in the Cook County jail was another terrible cost of anarchy. So, yeah, but they're human, but, they're still anarchists. So, yeah, it's maybe a little sad, but they chose this. They also made much of the talk that that women were fascinated with the 2 handsome bachelors on death row, the brooding Louis Ling and the elegant August Spies. The papers noted with interest Ling's visit with a young German woman named Elise Friedel, and they had a field day with Spy's prison courtship of the daughter of a Chicago businessman, Nina Van Zandt, whom Spy's married by proxy on January 29th of 1887. Woohoo! Getting it in prison. Hell yeah. Go, boys. Attorneys Black and Sweat, concerned that this relationship would only weaken the public sympathy for their clients, raised their own objections against the marriage to Spies to no avail. And, they must have, liked each other enough to do that. In spite of Spy's actions, with the passage of time, more and more voices were raised supporting the legal appeal, as well as a related movement to reduce the severity of the sentence. The clemency movement took on much greater urgency and gained many more adherents after the Illinois Supreme Court filed its opinion on September 14th, 1887, holding that there was nothing erroneous, vicious, or defective in the record, proceedings, or judgment. Justice Benjamin D. Magruder, speaking for a unanimous court, affirmed the verdict. He set November 11th, 1887 as the new date of execution for the 7 condemned men, ordering Neebe to be transferred to the state penitentiary to serve out his 15-year sentence. Whoo, boy, you got fucked over hard right there, buddy. The Defense Fund Committee's only remaining recourse was an appeal to the United States Supreme Court. To make its plea, it hired 3 nationally prominent attorneys, including the colorful Benjamin Butler, who, as a Civil War general, had headed the Union occupation of New Orleans and had since served his native Massachusetts as a congressman and governor. Chief Justice Morrison R. Waite permitted the petition for a writ of error to be heard in open court on account of the urgency of the case and its importance. In so doing, he warned that the petition would not be accepted unless it involved federal questions. Whew, and it's because they're just kind of this is a little after the Civil War. They don't want to be overstepping right now. Things are still a little spicy here with the federal courts, kind of overreach. The idea of an overreach. Over 3 days in late October, the anarchists' new attorneys did their best to raise such questions, but speaking for the court on November 2nd, Chief Justice Waite dismissed the petition. So, with 9 days left until the executions, clemency remained the only alternative to the gallows. The Amnesty Association, organized in the defendant's behalf, greatly stepped up its efforts, gathering tens of thousands of signatures in Chicago and beyond. Many of these were from businessmen, attorneys, clergy, journalists, writers, labor leaders, and other individuals of prominence. Several of the city's most powerful citizens, notably Marshall Field, stifled wider support by remaining firmly opposed to the commutation of the sentence. The clemency efforts were directed not only to Illinois Governor Richard Oglesby, in whose hands the power to commute the sentences lay, but at the condemned as well, since Oglesby could not act unless he was requested by a prisoner himself to do so. The anarchists were understandably resistant to the idea of asking forgiveness for a crime they contended they did not commit from an authority they despised. There we go. This is it's like you got to go, in order to survive, you have to go against some of your beliefs here. And Fielding and Schwab, nevertheless, did petition the governor. These guys were like, fuck it, I'll ask. And Spies did so on November 3rd, but changed his mind when he learned that the others in the movement had accused him of cowardice. Because he's like, oh man, fucking maybe they're right. When he withdrew his plea, Spies offered his own life in place of all the others. Ah, man, what a guy. Ling, Fisher, and Engel, always the staunchest opponents of the established order among the defendants, refused to even consider asking for mercy. In their opinion, their only crime was exercising their freedom. As for Albert Parsons, he repeatedly invoked American revolutionary patriot Patrick Henry's famous watchword, "Give me liberty or give me death." This proved inspirational to his committed allies among the anarchists, but it infuriated many involved in the defense and amnesty movements who saw it as a pointlessly suicidal gesture that reflected Parsons' desire for the dramatic gesture over practical action. One of them remarked in frustration, quote, "The appeal of Parsons for liberty or death is pure bathos and is in keeping with the theatrical nature of the man." They're like, God damn it, Parsons. Stop this shit. But Parsons was a hard motherfucker who was straight out of Chicago, okay? Like, he wasn't going to let any of that shit slide. And still, the clemency efforts continued, with delegations hastening to the state capitol in Springfield, where Governor Richard Oglesby patiently heard them out. The shift in public mood toward clemency was hampered when 5 days before November 11th, November 11th execution date, 4 pipe bombs were found under the bed in Ling's cell, evidently smuggled in by one of his visitors. Those trying to save Ling's life took a last desperate measure filing a motion for an insanity hearing on November 9th, but Ling had plans of his own. The next morning, he placed another smuggled explosive, a small blasting cap, in his mouth and lit the fuse. Because he was done. He didn't want to be hanged. He didn't want the state to take him out. He wanted to go out himself. So with the lower part of his face blown apart, he probably, my guess is he smuggled in enough explosives to kill the people who were wanting to die. And he was like, listen, don't let the state take you out. You just take yourself out. However, when he was the first one to do this, the lower part of his face would be blown apart, and Ling was suffered horribly for several hours until he finally passed away. So everyone else probably saw that and was like, no, I'll hang. I'll just hang. Oglesby commuted Fielden's and Schwab's sentences that same afternoon. And the following morning, he heard one final appeal from Black for the lives of the remaining 4 men on death row. After considering Black's report of a telegram claiming that the actual bomber had been located in New York, yet another mysterious loose end, Oglesby decided to let the judgment take its course. Back in Chicago, the city was in a state of unspeakable anxiety. There were rumors that the anarchists would make one last bold attempt to save their own. One wild story had 20,000 armed revolutionaries preparing to raid the Cook County Jail and blow up the public buildings. So people were making up shit. And it was just stoking the flames here. And so as a precaution, the police and militia assigned men to guard the homes of those active in the investigation and prosecution, as well as the Board of Trade building and some government offices. They posted sentries with rifles to guard the jail against possible invasion. A witness to the execution reported that the building felt like a precarious outpost in a critical battle. When Lucy Parsons tried to take her children to see their father one last time in the morning, he was to be hanged. They were first delayed, then arrested and taken away to Captain Shack's East Chicago Avenue station house, where they were strip searched and held until 3 hours after his death. They hated these motherfuckers. They hated and wanted them dead. Shortly before noon, the sheriff's men opened the condemned prisoner cells one by one and marched Spies, Parsons, Engel, and Fisher toward the gallows that had recently been erected in a long corridor at the north end of the jail. About 170 reporters and other witnesses waited in the corridor. All 4 anarchists had kept their composure in their final hours, reciting and singing inspirational poetry and songs, and going through their correspondence. Their arms and legs now bound by straps and handcuffs, their bodies draped in white shrouds, their heads completely covered with rough hoods, their necks in the noose, they each shouted one more declaration. The time will come when our silence will be more powerful than the voices you are throttling today, Spies prophesied, followed by Fisher and Engel, who successfully yelled out, "Hurrah for anarchy!" Fisher then defiantly told his listeners, "This is the happiest moment of my life." Dumb motherfucker. Oh, man. Parsons characteristically called out for a chance to address the world that had placed him on this gruesome stage. He said, "Will I be allowed to speak, O men of America?" He implored before demanding of his jailer, quote, "Let me speak, Sheriff Matson. Let the voice of the people be heard." He drew one last breath and was attempting to continue when the trap fell. He was going to keep talking and then just died. He died talking. Many people believe that the deaths of Spies, Parsons, Engel, and Fisher on the gallows of the Cook County Jail would be the last act of the dramas of Haymarket. At a Chicago Bar Association dinner for Judge Joseph Gary following the execution, corporate attorney Wirt Dexter warmly praised Gary for his conduct of the trial. As an officer of the Relief and Aid Society, Dexter had been a target of radical criticism since the mid-1870s, when demonstrations demanded that the society distribute its resources to starving Chicagoans. So, this motherfucker was like super happy he didn't have to like worry about that anymore. He's like, they're not asking me to feed the poor anymore. Good. I'm fucking done with those assholes. I didn't want to feed the poor. No one does. Dexter now made the stirring, if dubious, declaration that he and other like-minded lawyers, guided by men like Gary, formed the, quote, conservative element that would effectively deal with contemporary social turmoil. And said, quote, "When men armed with destructive theories seek their enforcement, which would speedily make for us an earthly hell, other professions will expostulate," Dexter assured his listeners. End quote. But the law, and I say it with Judge Gary sitting in our midst, will hang. Woo, boy, that is, if that isn't, just a sheer declaration of, yeah, listen, we're gonna team up and kill anybody who goes against us. Just shout right there. I don't know what else is. Gary, who was roundly applauded that evening for his performance during the trial, followed Dexter's remarks with his own speech, in which he attacked labor organizers. So, yeah, again, these guys went against any labor. They were against labor organizations. Imagine if today, one of the unions, some guy in a union at a rally decided to throw a fucking bomb, and then everyone who's against unions, like business owners and lawyers who, got paid by business owners or were like in a business owner's pocket, decided then to persecute and judge the leaders of a union to shut it down completely. That's essentially what fucking happened here. Police Inspector John Bonfield's brother James, the detective on the force, meanwhile declared that there would not be another red flag in Chicago for 50 years. Captain Michael Shack, who had played such a major role in the arrest following the bombing, similarly bragged that, quote, there will be a big crowd of anarchists on their way back to Europe in the coming few weeks. Shack, who adored the limelight in which Haymarket had placed him, was determined to stay there and to keep receiving funds from business men worried about the unrest. So Shack was quick to reject the notion that the threat was over. He wanted to, if equally quick to assure the public that he would squelch any further trouble. He said, I quote, I tell you, the anarchist business has only commenced, and before it is through with we will have them all in jail, hung, or driven out of the city. More surprising and disturbing were the responses of some of those who had supported clemency or believed a great injustice had been done, but who still wondered if the harsh punishment brought certain positive results. Lyman Abbott, a one-time lawyer who had become a clergyman and the influential editor of the socially aware Christian Century, had opposed the death penalty for the anarchists and described Haymarket as tragic, but he later said that it served a useful purpose and that it quote, put an end to the communist international in America and awakened the complacent and self-satisfied nation to the existing perils, end quote. In his reminiscences of the case prepared almost half a century after the trial, attorney Samuel McConnell, a leader of the clemency movement who was elected to the circuit court in 1889, observed that, quote, the hanging of these men did do away with the hysteria which had pervaded the body of the people, end quote. He added with regret that perhaps the public did not care who was hanged as long as someone was to ease its anxiety. This is all done just to shut people the fuck up and to get people to stop questioning the current social order. And that is where we're going to end today's historical whirl. Well, there you guys go. Proper full-ass episode. Almost 2 hours here. So I actually still have more notes on this that I didn't even get to get through for this whole thing. I mean, this whole trial and everything that happened is fucking insane. Curious to hear what you guys thought. Let me know. Let me know what you thought about this. Do you think they were guilty for inciting the bomb? I mean, they did talk about how dynamite. I still don't think that they should have been labeled as guilty. I don't think it was a conspiracy that they enacted, obviously. I mean, and then the fucking police doing everything in their power to just get these people killed. Insane. It's nuts to me, man. There's more issues with this too. Honestly, I could do a whole ass, probably another hour and a half episode on just the other shit that happened afterwards. And it's just nuts. But today is Mother's Day, the day that I'm recording. So happy Mother's Day to everyone. If you're a mother, good on you. It's a hard ass job. And, if you're not a mother or, you're someone, maybe you are in a way to someone, maybe you've taken care of someone or you've, been loving to someone in a way that is motherly. And in a weird way, they view you as almost like a surrogate mother. And so happy Mother's Day to you too. That's important in people's lives. Don't discredit yourself if you think that you don't deserve to be called a mother at all. If you are still, like doing the job of one, essentially. I know there are many people in my life personally who have needed to have a motherly guidance or a motherly love shown to them. And it wasn't gifted by their own mothers, but instead by other people. And they view those people as like a mother to themselves. And so it's a beautiful thing that people can do for another in those situations. So all respect to you guys that do that. Single dads that have to play like the role of being a mom too. That's so tough. It's so rough. I'm very grateful for my wife who is able to, be a mother to our kids, and I don't have to have that role also thrust upon me. I'm grateful that I get to just be a dad, and I'm, grateful that I have someone who is such a loving and, trusting mother to my kids. So, sorry, that got a little deep there for no fucking reason. Albert Parsons, the OG Ice Cube. Okay. Hopefully that was fun for you guys. I know my rapping's not great, but fuck it. I was just like, I'll try to do it. I know it's kind of shit. That's why I only did like a verse. So that was fun for me to do. That was a good time. The more I was reading up on this, the more I kept thinking like, this is kind of like how, not quite, but the injustice that was dealt out is very similar to the injustices that the Black community deal with. But for them, it was like a one-time event, whereas for minorities, it's a daily occurrence. And so hopefully that's, I'm not trying to be disrespectful here. I was just drawing some parallels between the two. So, because I just thought it was interesting. Yeah, sorry that this took so long to make. I mean, fuck, I already had done like 2 other episodes that like this. Just to get this almost like 2-hour episode done. I'm finally not sick. I was able to, have everything put together in like a semi-cohesive way, and I was able to enjoy it. So, and again, thank you to ChicagoHistoryResources.org for the article that you have on this. It really helped, and it put everything into a lot of perspective. Thank you for all the wonderful notes and for all the extra stuff too from the different trials I was able to pull from, the quotes for August Spies and for Albert Parsons. It was great. Appreciate it. Thank you to Mike Ritz at the New Belief Studio for the key fobs. Speaking of which, please, if you guys are interested in winning that, leave a review, then email me. And I just need to talk to you so I can get your address to send the fob out too. You can also DM me on Instagram, and again, you can just say you up. It can be like 2 a.m. You just message me you up, and I know what that means, and then I'll just send you. I'll just be like, what's your address? Like it is a booty call, except it's just a key fob call. It's just a little key fob call. Yeah, no, again, thank you guys. This has been great. It's been a lot of fun. This show is one of my favorite hobbies that I do. I'm excited for next week. Next week's going to be a shorter one, but a good one. It's going to involve a judge from today's story. Again, it's going to be involved in it. It's all, again, still in Chicago. The week after that will probably be a little bit of a bigger one. I'm going to go back in time a little more. And then I got some really great suggestions from Mike Ritz for a couple different tales. So going to have a lot of fun. A lot of fun episodes here coming up in the next few weeks. So let's keep it going. Spread the quarrels, spread the fighting, spread the violence, just like the anarchists did. But do it through podcasts. Spread my podcast to spread the violence in a way. Spread the message of hatred. I'm just kidding. But no, seriously, I love you guys. Happy Mother's Day again. Have a good one. Peace out.